6 years. A measure of time defined by ritual and expectation. The widow had earned her title, carefully tending the shrine of memory, upholding a legacy built on the quiet strength of devotion. She was the centerpiece of a family portrait framed by absence, a mother, a grandmother, a dignified pillar whose life, the world agreed, had reached its quiet completion. She accepted the comfortable shroud of perpetual mourning, believing she owed it to the memory of the man she had lost, and to the grown children who watched her every move. But grief, like winter, eventually gives way. When destiny introduced her to a new partner, a man who saw beyond the title and into the vibrant, beating heart she had long kept hidden, a dangerous, exhilarating truth ignited within her. She dared to listen to the whispers of a second chance. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Her children, zealous guardians of their father's hallowed ground, saw the burgeoning romance not as life renewed, but as sacrilege. Disbelief curdled into cold fury. Their whispers became shouts, laced with condemnation. "Are you insane?" The accusation became a refrain, echoing through elegant halls and polite conversations. They dismissed her joy as a desperate aberration, her needs as instability, and the man who brought her solace as nothing more than an opportunistic schemer looking to exploit a foolish, vulnerable woman. She was suddenly forced onto a battlefield she never sought, the tyrannical demand that she remain eternally defined by loss. They required the dutiful matriarch, she yearned for the defiant woman. This is the story of a reckoning, a woman facing the crushing judgment of those she loves most, fighting not for a man, but for the fundamental, non-negotiable right to self-determination, even if it means fracturing the very foundation of her family. It is a battle against the tyranny of memory, and the extraordinary risk of choosing the uncertain, vibrant future over the sanctified past. The Sycamore Creek estate stood silent in the oppressive heat of late summer 2024, its manicured lawns reflecting the meticulously ordered life of its owner. It was a home built for grand, loud family gatherings, yet 6 years after the passing of Arthur Jeffrey Vance, it had become a mausoleum of cherished memory, meticulously maintained by Eleanor Vance, 56. Eleanor was a woman of undeniable elegance, but a close observer could see the fine lines etched around her kind eyes, not from age, but from years spent performing the role of the dignified, perpetual widow. She sat on the sun porch, pretending to read a thick biography, but her gaze was fixed on the humid air shimmering above the rose bushes Arthur had planted. It had been 3 months since the first accidental, exhilarating meeting with Caleb Hayes, 58. Caleb, with his distinguished silver hair and a gentle demeanor that suggested a life lived richly but quietly, represented something terrifying and intoxicating, a future. A life outside the perimeter of Arthur's perfect, hallowed past. The relationship had started with coffee, escalated quickly to shared dinners, and had recently solidified into something profoundly tender and unexpected. It felt like stealing joy. Eleanor had spent years believing her capacity for deep, consuming passion had been extinguished, banked entirely for her children and grandchildren. Caleb, however, had simply turned the lights back on. The reckoning began not with a phone call, but with an ambush planned with military precision. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the estate's massive mahogany door swung open without warning. Eleanor looked up from her porch chair to see her children standing stiffly in the great room, their faces set in twin expressions of severe disapproval. "We need to talk, Mom," Ryan stated, his voice devoid of warmth, echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. Eleanor set her book down, the false calm she had cultivated for 6 years cracking at the edges. She knew what this was about. She invited them into the formal parlor, where Arthur's influence was heaviest. Above the fireplace hung a large portrait of him, handsome and smiling, observing the scene with silent judgment. "I assume this is about Caleb," Eleanor said, deciding to forego the pretense of ignorance. Ryan placed the briefcase on the polished antique coffee table, opening it not to reveal papers, but to highlight the seriousness of the meeting. He pulled out Arthur's gold watch, a heavy, solid piece of engineering, placing it deliberately beside Eleanor's hand. "It's about Dad, Mom." "It's about respect," Ryan began, his voice rising in volume and contempt. 6 years. 6 years, and you've done everything right. You kept the house perfect, you managed the trust, you were the pillar. Now this. He spat the last word out like an accusation. Jessica, tearful and manipulative, leaned forward. We just don't understand, Mom. This isn't you. You look desperate. Like you've lost control. Eleanor felt the heat rising in her chest. I haven't lost control, Jessica. I've simply chosen to live again. Live? Ryan scoffed, leaning over her. This Caleb, this Hayes fellow. We did some checking. Divorced twice. Runs a small, semi-successful landscaping firm. Mom, look at the optics. After everything Dad built, after the life you had, you choose a man who is clearly looking for a soft landing and a hefty inheritance. He is not interested in money, Ryan. He is kind, intelligent, and he makes me laugh, Eleanor retorted, trying to keep her voice level. Kindness doesn't pay the taxes on this house, Mom. Or fund the Vance family trust, Ryan countered, shifting the conversation to the legal ground he felt most secure on. We are serious, Eleanor. This is an intervention. We have compiled data. The sudden change in your social patterns, the expenditures, it's concerning. You need to understand how this looks. Jessica gripped her mother's hand, but the touch felt suffocating, not supportive. Are you insane, Mom? Are you actively trying to dishonor Dad's memory? He was the love of your life. This man is a pathetic rebound. People are talking. Our friends. Grandma Agnes. They all think you've lost your mind. The phrase lost your mind struck Eleanor like a physical blow. They weren't seeing her as a woman seeking happiness, they were seeing her as a financial liability and a familial embarrassment. I am 56 years old, Eleanor stated, pulling her hand away from Jessica's clammy grip. I am a fully competent adult, and my happiness is not subject to your consensus, nor is it dependent on the preservation of a static, perfect version of your father. Ryan's face hardened. This was the moment of the escalated threat. He closed the briefcase with a loud snap, the sound echoing ominously. If you continue this relationship, Mom, we will have to seriously consider our fiduciary responsibilities regarding the trust. We have already spoken to Mr. Carmichael. If we feel that your judgment is compromised, if you become financially vulnerable due to this man's influence, we have the ability, and the legal right, to petition the court to appoint a co-trustee. Ryan paused, letting the weight of the threat settle. We will protect Dad's legacy, even if it means protecting you from yourself. Eleanor stood up, her frame surprisingly steady against their assault. Her heart was pounding, but the years of conflict avoidance had just run out. Get out of my house, she said, her voice low but clear. The meeting is over. The children left, but the silence they left behind was filled with the residue of their contempt. Eleanor looked at Arthur's gold watch glinting on the table, a symbol of the life she was expected to continue performing. She scooped it up and placed it back reverently, not out of fear, but out of a need to separate the genuine love she had for Arthur from the emotional cage her children had constructed using his memory. The following week, the tension was palpable. Ryan and Jessica refused to answer Eleanor's calls unless they concerned childcare logistics. They were attempting to isolate her, to make the cost of Caleb too high. Eleanor, desperate for normalcy and connection, arranged a dinner with Caleb at the Metropolitan Grill, an upscale restaurant known for its discreet booths and low lighting. It was meant to be a moment of respite, a small island of sanity. She arrived early, smoothing the lap of her dress. She felt beautiful, lighter than she had in years. Caleb arrived shortly after, pulling out her chair and kissing her hand with a tenderness that spoke volumes. You look troubled, Elle, he noted, his gaze perceptive. Eleanor briefly recounted the intervention, omitting the most brutal details, but admitting the threat to the Vance family trust. Caleb listened patiently. They see me as a threat to their security, not just to their memory of Arthur, he summarized. And you, my dear, they see as property that has gone rogue. Just as they clinked wine glasses, celebrating their small, stolen moment of peace, the smooth veneer of the Metropolitan Grill shattered. Ryan and Jessica materialized beside their table, both dressed impeccably, their expressions icy. Fancy meeting you here, Mom, Jessica drawled, her tone dripping with sarcasm. We were just having a quiet dinner, Eleanor replied, her jaw tightening. Ryan cut directly to the core, ignoring Eleanor completely, addressing Caleb directly. Mr. Hayes, Ryan said, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from the surrounding tables. Let's be clear. My mother is grieving. 6 years is nothing when you lose a man like Arthur Vance. She is emotionally vulnerable, and we know exactly what you are doing. Caleb met Ryan's aggressive gaze with serene calm. I beg your pardon? The cottage by the lake. The modest business. The slightly overdue property taxes on your home, Ryan recited, pulling a small, laminated sheet of paper from his pocket, a deliberate display of invasive surveillance. You're in debt. You see an elegant, wealthy woman whose grief has clouded her judgment, and you see a way out. We won't allow it. Jessica interjected, her voice tight with artificial panic. Mom, you need to look at this objectively. He is using you. He wants the house, the lifestyle. Look at his cheap little gifts. She pointed derisively at the delicate silver chain around Eleanor's neck. This was the Aegean pendant, a gift Caleb had given her just last week, purchased on a whim from a small craftsman. It was not expensive, but it symbolized the acceptance of her new life, the cool, smooth metal a comfort against her skin. Eleanor reached up, touching the pendant. For the first time, she felt a burning need to protect Caleb, who had done nothing but offer her unsolicited kindness. Jessica, Ryan, stop it, Eleanor commanded, her voice ringing with newfound authority. You are making a scene. We're trying to save you from ruin. Ryan hissed. Or at least, save the family name from this grotesque lapse in judgment. End this, Mom. Tonight. Or we start the legal process tomorrow. Caleb placed his hand gently over Eleanor's, a steady anchor in the storm. Eleanor, he said, addressing her, but his voice loud enough for the children to hear. I will not be the cause of a permanent split in your family. If this is too much, I understand. Eleanor looked at Caleb, then at her children, two faces contorted by fear and control. She realized they were holding her captive not with love, but with expectation. She stood up slowly, her gaze sweeping over the polished arrogance of her son and the manufactured distress of her daughter. Ryan. Jessica, she stated, picking up her small evening clutch. I am not suffering a lapse. I am recovering my sense of self. Caleb is not manipulating me, he is treating me with the respect and affection that you seem incapable of providing. I am not foolish, and I am certainly not desperate. I am choosing a life that is vibrant and complicated, over one that is rigid and dead. And I refuse to be mocked by my own children. She turned to Caleb. We are leaving, Caleb. As they walked out of the Metropolitan Grill, leaving Ryan and Jessica sputtering protests behind them, Eleanor didn't look back. She had drawn the line in the sand. She knew the consequences would be immense. The fracture widened drastically over the next few weeks. Calls went unanswered. The grandchildren were suddenly unavailable for visits. Eleanor felt the cold, deliberate isolation. She spent more time at Willow Bend Cottage, Caleb's cozy, slightly rustic home near the quiet lake, which offered a stark contrast to the stifling grandeur of Sycamore Creek. At Caleb's, the air smelled of wood smoke and possibility, not dust and legacy. The ultimate confrontation was set for Thanksgiving Day 2024. Thanksgiving at Sycamore Creek Estate had always been the apex of the Vance social calendar. It was a performance of traditional American affluence, and Arthur had always revived in the role of patriarch. This year, Eleanor had insisted Caleb be included. She had issued the invitation not as a request, but as a condition of the gathering. Ryan, furious but unwilling to abandon the traditional setting, had agreed under protest, treating Caleb's presence as a temporary, unpleasant infection. The atmosphere was glacial. The dining table was set for 12, but the space between the people felt miles wide. Ryan kept touching Arthur's gold watch, which he had conspicuously placed in the breast pocket of his vest. Jessica drank too much wine, her anxiety manifesting as biting, passive-aggressive commentary. Caleb, dressed simply but impeccably, remained polite and contained, answering invasive questions about his financial history with open honesty, refusing to take the bait. The dinner progressed through the polite veneer of cranberry sauce and forced gratitude until the inevitable moment of combustion arrived. As Eleanor was clearing the dessert plates, Ryan stood up, clearing his throat loudly, calling for the room's attention. "I think we need to address the elephant in the room," Ryan announced, his voice booming with false gravitas. "We are a family built on integrity and the strong foundation that Dad built. And we are concerned that Mom is systematically destroying that foundation." Eleanor paused by the buffet, holding a stack of plates. She set them down carefully, turning to face him. Jessica burst into calculated tears. "Mom, why are you doing this to us? Do you hate Dad so much that you have to parade this replacement in front of us? It's humiliating." Ryan stepped forward, pulling the document outlining the Vance family trust from his jacket. "The financial advisor has confirmed significant changes in Mom's spending habits. Small, non-itemized withdrawals that suggest instability. This is not about love, Mom. This is about protecting our assets, Arthur's assets, from a predatory individual." He gestured dismissively toward Caleb. "Predatory?" Caleb finally spoke, his voice quiet, drawing everyone's attention with its unexpected steel. "Vance, your father was a great man, but his money and his name do not grant you the right to slander mine." "Silence, Hayes," Ryan snapped. "This is a family matter. Mom, we have given you every opportunity to come to your senses. We are formally requesting, in front of everyone here, that you terminate this relationship immediately. We will help you find a qualified grief counselor, a proper one. If you refuse, we will move forward with the co-trustee petition Monday morning." The room held its breath. The silence was thick with years of unsaid resentment and expectation. Eleanor looked around the table. Her cousins, her sister-in-law, all looking at her with pity and judgment. They were all complicit in demanding she remain in the gilded cage. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. She walked slowly, deliberately, toward the head of the table, past Ryan, who stood blocking her path like a sentry. She reached the chair where Arthur used to sit, the throne of the patriarch. "I heard you, Ryan," she said, her voice steady. "You want me to choose. You want me to choose the memory of your father over the reality of my own life. You want me to choose isolation over companionship. You want me to choose performance over authenticity." She paused, placing both hands firmly on the carved wood of the chair back. "Your father, Arthur, was a wonderful man. I loved him completely, and I honored him by being the best wife and mother I could be. When he died, part of me died too. For 6 years, I have been performing the role of the devoted widow, meticulously maintaining this shrine because I was afraid that if I stopped, I would lose you, too." Tears welled in Jessica's eyes, but Eleanor paid them no mind. She was looking only at Ryan. "But the truth, Ryan, is that you and Jessica have not honored Arthur's memory, you have weaponized it. You have used his absence, and my grief, to control me. You have demanded that I remain a static monument to your comfort, defining me solely by my relationship to a deceased man." Eleanor took a deep, liberating breath. "I am Eleanor. I am 56 years old. I am your mother, but I am not your property, and my life is not a footnote to my late husband's. I do not need your permission to be happy, and I certainly do not need your legal threats to determine my sanity." She looked directly at Ryan, her gaze unflinching. "I will not end my relationship with Caleb. He has brought light back into a life you were content to keep dimmed. If you wish to proceed with your legal threats, then do so. If you wish to fracture this family permanently because I chose to reclaim my autonomy, then that is your choice, not mine. I refuse to be held hostage by the tyranny of your expectations." Eleanor turned to Caleb, offering him a small, genuine smile. "Caleb, would you mind helping me with the rest of the plates?" The shift in power was absolute. Ryan was left standing by the table, the Vance family trust document trembling in his hand, his planned attack completely neutralized by his mother's refusal to fear him. Jessica was sobbing quietly, realizing her manipulative power had evaporated. The guests began murmuring, and within minutes, the Thanksgiving celebration, the symbolic pillar of their perfect family unit, had collapsed into uncomfortable silence and hasty departures. Ryan and Jessica tried one final, desperate emotional appeal as Caleb helped Eleanor pack a small overnight bag. "Mom, please. Don't leave. This is your home," Jessica pleaded. "It has been a beautiful prison, Jessica," Eleanor stated, closing the zipper on her bag. "But I am checking out. You are making a huge mistake. This is irrevocable," Ryan warned, his voice low with cold fury. "Perhaps," Eleanor acknowledged. "But for the first time in 6 years, the mistake is mine to make." Eleanor took Caleb's arm, and together they walked out of the Sycamore Creek estate. The front door closed behind them, muffling the sounds of Ryan's angry exhalations. They drove away from the opulent, suffocating estate and headed toward the familiar comfort of Willow Bend Cottage. The drive was silent, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with mutual respect and a sense of earned freedom. When they arrived at the cottage, the air was cool and crisp, smelling of pine needles and lake water. Inside, the fire was already laid in the hearth. The cottage was small, messy in an organic, living way, and utterly welcoming. Eleanor sank onto the sofa, finally letting out the breath she had held for the entire afternoon. Caleb sat beside her, not speaking, simply holding her hand. "They will fight you, Elle," Caleb said gently. "They won't stop with the trust threats." "I know," Eleanor whispered, looking at the firelight dancing on the wall. "But the fighting is external now. For 6 years, the battle was internal. I was fighting myself, telling myself I didn't deserve happiness, telling myself I had to earn their approval. That's over. They took their best shot today, and I survived." She looked down at her hand, noticing the simple beauty of the Aegean pendant resting against her collarbone. It wasn't Arthur's gold watch, marking the passage of time and the weight of legacy. It was a simple silver curve, reflecting the soft, warm light of the fire, a beacon of a future that belonged only to her. Eleanor Vance, the pillar, the martyr, the grieving widow, was gone. In her place sat a woman who had faced the crushing weight of family scorn and chosen herself. She had chosen the vibrant, complicated, and utterly unexpected love that destiny had presented her. She turned to Caleb, the weariness replaced by profound determination. "We start now," Eleanor said, her voice decisive. "Whatever they throw at us, we face it together. I am finished living in memory." She kissed him, sealing the choice not just for their relationship, but for her own soul. The path forward was uncertain, shadowed by the inevitable legal skirmishes and the difficult reality of a permanent family fracture, but Eleanor no longer felt fragile. She felt fortified. The battle for self-determination against the tyranny of memory had been fought, and Eleanor Vance had finally, unequivocally, won. She was home, and the future, however complicated, was irrevocably her own. The silence at Willow Bend Cottage the morning after Thanksgiving was absolute, broken only by the crackling demise of the last logs in the hearth. The light that filtered through the lace curtains was soft and yielding, a stark contrast to the sterile glare that always permeated the Sycamore Creek estate. Eleanor awoke slowly, stretching in a bed that felt infinitely warmer and smaller than the vast, cold expanse she had occupied for 6 years. She was pressed against Caleb, his breath steady and deep in her hair. This proximity, this unvarnished intimacy, was the purest form of defiance she had ever known. She slipped out of bed and walked to the window, pulling aside the curtain just enough to see the lake shimmering under a thin layer of frost. Yesterday, she had walked out of a life; today, she woke up in one. The sense of liberation was dizzying, accompanied by a sharp, inevitable pang of grief, not for Arthur, but for the loss of the relationship she once shared with her children. Caleb stirred and came up behind her, wrapping a worn flannel robe around her shoulders before pulling her back against his chest. "Morning, Elle," he murmured, his voice husky. "Good morning," she replied, leaning into his strength. "Did you sleep well, considering the performance?" Caleb chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. I slept like a man who just watched the woman he loves finally choose herself. It was worth a few unpleasant remarks about my property tax status. Eleanor turned to face him, tracing the fine lines around his eyes. They were vicious, Caleb. I need you to know I am sorry they treated you that way. They treated you exactly as I feared they would. They acted out of fear, Elle. An entitlement, he corrected gently. Ryan believes the world owes him the comfort of the status quo. Jessica believes her value is tied to your suffering. You broke both of their foundational myths yesterday. It's natural they reacted violently. She pulled away, moving toward the small, efficient kitchen. They are going to follow through. Ryan will call Mr. Carmichael this morning. He doesn't bluff when the Vance family trust is involved. Then we deal with it, Caleb said simply, pouring water for coffee. We fight the paper, not the feeling. We know where the heart of the fight is. The heart of the fight, Eleanor realized, was no longer in justifying Caleb's character, it was in defining the boundary between Arthur's legacy and her present autonomy. The trust was a complex legal mechanism, designed decades ago to protect Arthur's vast assets and ensure generational continuity, but it was also the last tether Ryan and Jessica could use to yank her back into compliance. Meanwhile, at the Sycamore Creek estate, the air was thick with the residue of their strategic failure. Ryan, dressed in a crisply starched shirt despite it being a holiday, paced the parlor carpet, the trust document now resting on Arthur's massive executive desk, a desk that, in Ryan's mind, symbolized absolute authority. Jessica was on the phone in the adjacent room, speaking in hushed, furious tones to her husband about the humiliation they had suffered. Ryan stopped pacing and slammed his fist onto the mahogany surface, making the gold watch jump slightly. She chose him. Ryan snarled, not to anyone specifically, but to the room, to the disapproving portrait of Arthur hanging above the fireplace. She chose a cottage and a landscaper over her family. Over her blood. Over Dad's memory. He picked up the phone and dialed a familiar, institutional number. Mr. Carmichael, Ryan's voice was instantly calibrated to professional gravity. Ryan Vance. Happy Thanksgiving. Listen, the situation with my mother has escalated dramatically. We need to initiate the process for the co-trustee petition immediately. I believe her judgment is now demonstrably compromised. Yes, the sudden change in social patterns, the alienation of the family, and the continued relationship with Hayes, a man whose sole motivation is clearly financial exploitation. I need the papers drafted and filed by Monday morning. He hung up, the decision executed with cold finality. He wasn't just protecting the assets, he was inflicting the consequence he had promised. He needed Eleanor to feel the immense, suffocating weight of the Vance machine against her single, fragile choice. Jessica entered the parlor, her face blotchy from crying, or perhaps, from the effort of manipulating tears. What did Carmichael say? He said it's complicated, but feasible. The trust allows for co-trustee appointment if the primary trustee's competency or financial prudence is in question. We have the data, Jessica. We have the paper trail of the small withdrawals, the gifts, the clear pattern of reckless behavior. We paint the picture of a lonely, desperate woman who has been successfully groomed. Jessica shivered, but the anxiety in her eyes was mixed with grim satisfaction. We have to bring her back, Ryan. This is not just about the money. This is about who we are. If Mom is allowed to define herself outside of Dad's life, then what does that make us? Just two grown children clinging to an idea? Ryan looked at her, his expression hard. No. It makes us the guardians of the legacy. She will realize she cannot fight this. She'll come crawling back. She always avoids conflict. This time, conflict is unavoidable, and she knows it. What Ryan failed to grasp, what both children fundamentally misunderstood, was that the Eleanor they knew, the one who deferred, apologized, and managed conflict by internalizing it, had died on the sun porch 3 months prior. The woman who walked out yesterday was not conflict avoidant, she was conflict resolved. 2 days later, Eleanor had to return to Sycamore Creek. Not to apologize, but to gather the essential documents Ryan had failed to secure. Caleb drove her, parking his well-used, slightly mud-splattered truck conspicuously in the circular drive, a defiant blue-collar contrast to the fleet of pristine black sedans that usually populated the space. 10 minutes, Caleb. I just need the safe deposit key and my personal legal files, she told him, her hand tight on the handle of her favorite leather briefcase. The house felt dead. The silence was heavier than usual, laced with stale anger. Ryan and Jessica were nowhere to be seen, likely avoiding a direct confrontation while their legal attack was mobilized. Eleanor moved through the great rooms, past the heavy portraits and the museum-quality antique furniture. She realized she had not been living here, she had been curating it. She walked into the master bedroom, the room she had shared with Arthur, and later, inhabited alone. She went to the immense, built-in mahogany closet, pulled out a small, secured box from the back shelf, and retrieved the necessary keys and documents. As she did this, her eye caught something Ryan had deliberately left out, Arthur's favorite cardigan, still hanging on the cedar hook, perfectly preserved, still carrying the faint scent of his expensive cologne. For 6 years, the scent had been a comfort, a tactile link to a happy past. Now, it felt like a restraint. She reached out, running a finger over the fine wool, recognizing the genuine, deep love she had felt for the man who wore it. But that love did not require her self-immolation. In a moment of profound, cleansing clarity, Eleanor took the cardigan down, folding it neatly, and placed it inside a box marked for donation to a local men's shelter. She wasn't erasing Arthur, she was integrating him into history, rather than forcing him to be her future. This small, private act of defiance was more powerful than her public rejection of Ryan. It was the complete, psychological detachment from the expectation of perpetual grief. As she descended the grand staircase, her personal briefcase firmly in hand, she paused, looking at the entire, opulent hall. It was a beautiful, cold house. But it was not her home anymore. She didn't slam the door when she left, she simply closed it quietly, the decisive click of the lock symbolizing the final severing of the tie. The following Monday, the anticipated legal skirmish began. Ryan, true to his word, had the petition filed. Eleanor's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from her longtime personal attorney, Miss Holloway, who had previously handled only quiet estate management and charitable filings. Eleanor and Caleb drove into the city to meet Miss Holloway, whose office was in a sleek, modern tower miles away from the traditional, old-money law firms Ryan favored. Miss Holloway, a sharp woman with an air of practiced competence, did not mince words. Eleanor, the petition is severe. Ryan is arguing for co-trusteeship, citing reckless financial judgment and emotional instability. He is leaning heavily on the fact that you've changed counsel multiple times over the past few years, arguing this relationship is the apex of that instability. Eleanor leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the desk. Is there any merit to the claim that Caleb is defrauding me? Absolutely none, based on the preliminary audit we conducted of his company and his personal finances. He is solvent, if not wealthy. The fact that he accepted modest gifts from you, a new computer, perhaps, or help with a mortgage payment, can be spun by Ryan, but it doesn't meet the threshold for fraud. Caleb spoke up, his demeanor serious. I am prepared to sign any document, waive any right, and provide full transparency to prove my intentions are ethical. I will not be the wedge that compromises Eleanor's financial security. Holloway smiled slightly. That helps, Mr. Hayes. But the heart of this case is not really about Mr. Hayes or your money. It's about control. Ryan feels entitled to dictate your life choices, and he is using the complexity of the trust to exert that control. We need to demonstrate 2 things to the court: first, that your financial management remains impeccable, and second, that your decision-making, though unconventional in their view, is sound. Eleanor took a deep breath. Then let's show them. I want to fight this fully, Ms. Holloway. I want to dissect every single allegation. I will not be defined by my children's fear. Over the next 2 weeks, the process was exhausting. Eleanor spent hours in Ms. Holloway's office, meticulously reviewing 6 years of financial records. She had always been a diligent trustee, managing Arthur's portfolio with shrewd foresight. Ryan's case was built entirely on inference and personal disgust, not on actual negligence. However, the pain of the accusations was pervasive. Ryan and Jessica, through their legal filings and aggressive communications, were portraying her to the world, to the probate judge, to their social circle, as a caricature, the foolish, desperate older woman who had succumbed to a midlife crisis and was being preyed upon. A particularly vicious deposition request arrived late one evening, demanding intimate details of her relationship with Caleb, attempting to prove emotional vulnerability. Eleanor read the cold, legal language, and the rage she felt was pure and clarifying. They wanted to humiliate her into submission. They wanted her to feel the shame they believed she deserved for daring to be happy. She set the papers down and walked into Caleb's small living room, where he was studying blueprints for a new landscaping project. "They want to make this ugly, Caleb," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "They are demanding to know things that are intensely private. They are trying to reduce our love to a transaction of pity and financial exchange." Caleb set his blueprints aside, his gaze fixed on her. "I know. This is what entitlement does, Elle. When they can't control you, they try to destroy your reputation. It's the ultimate tyranny." "I can stop this," Eleanor said, the temptation whispering to her. "I can simply agree to their demand, end things with you publicly, and they will withdraw the petition. I could have my life back, the easy, comfortable life." Caleb stood up and walked toward her. He didn't pressure her or plead his case. "Your easy life was a prison, Eleanor. And it cost you your soul. This is hard, and it costs you reputation and stability. But it grants you yourself," he said, taking her hands. "I will never ask you to choose me over your family, or over your comfort. But if you choose to end this relationship now, you will be doing it for the wrong reason. You will be proving to Ryan and Jessica that their contempt holds more power than your self-respect." The choice was laid bare again, the sanctity of the past, or the uncertainty of the future. The tyranny of memory, or the hard-won battle for autonomy. "I won't do it," Eleanor whispered, the strength returning, settling deep in her bones. "I won't let them win. Not because of the money, but because I refuse to be silenced." The legal battle stretched through the holiday season and into the new year. It was a tedious, ugly affair, waged primarily through emails and procedural maneuvering, designed to drain Eleanor emotionally and financially. Yet, for Eleanor, the pressure had an unexpected effect. It crystallized her resolve. Every attack Ryan launched only further severed the emotional cords tying her to her old life. She began spending time with Caleb not just as a lover, but as a collaborator in building a new future. They worked side by side in his garden, discussing plants and soil, a world away from investment portfolios and estate management. She began to understand that the true legacy Arthur left her was not the trust, but the strength and competence she had gained managing it, resources she now fiercely deployed for her own defense. One cold January afternoon, Eleanor and Caleb were at Willow Bend Cottage. They had just received a communication from Miss Holloway that the court was highly skeptical of Ryan's case, suggesting the petition was likely to be dismissed due to lack of evidence of true negligence. Ryan's overreach had begun to backfire. They celebrated with a simple meal by the fire. "We're winning, Elle," Caleb noted, raising his glass of inexpensive Cabernet. "We are," Eleanor agreed, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine or the fire. She had not spoken to Ryan or Jessica since Thanksgiving. There were no more manipulative phone calls, only harsh, sterile correspondence filtered through lawyers. The family was permanently fractured, at least for now. Eleanor found herself looking at the Aegean pendant around her neck. It had survived the ordeal, a small, quiet symbol of her fidelity to herself. "I keep thinking about what Jessica said at the restaurant," Eleanor mused, stirring the fire with a poker. "Look at his cheap little gifts." She was so focused on the monetary value, Caleb. They saw Arthur's gold watch as an index of respect, and this simple silver necklace as an index of desperation. Caleb took the poker from her hand, his expression thoughtful. "It's about weight," Arthur's watch was heavy. It was beautiful, but it was heavy with expectation, history, and status. It defined you by what you had. He gently touched the pendant resting on her collarbone. This is light. It's beautiful, and it defines you by who you are becoming. That lightness is what they fear the most. They want the weight back, because weight is predictable. Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder, finally, completely untethered from the heavy expectations of the past. She accepted the trade, the weight of opulence for the lightness of truth. The guaranteed comfort of the widow role for the difficult, vibrant reality of the woman who chose to live. The court battle would continue to simmer, but the internal war was over. Eleanor Vance, at 56, was no longer waiting for permission to live. She had earned her second chapter not through careful mourning, but through fierce, decisive self-possession. The fire crackled, warm and inviting. The sound of the lake outside was a promise of spring and growth, not decay and memory. Eleanor closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of Caleb's home, wood smoke, pine, and possibility. She was free. The uncertainty of the future was hers, and she embraced it fully. Her choice had cost her much, but it had ultimately returned her to herself. She had chosen life, and in that choice, she had already won everything that truly mattered. The legal process, initiated by Ryan's frantic call to Mr. Carmichael, quickly morphed from a formal inquiry into a sustained campaign of psychological warfare. Ryan and Jessica weren't merely questioning Eleanor's financial prudence, they were attempting to invalidate her reality, treating her happiness as evidence of a mental break. Ms. Holloway, Eleanor's attorney, forwarded a stack of interrogatories, formal questions designed to gather evidence, that were breathtaking in their intimacy and invasive quality. They are reaching for anything, Holloway noted during their weekly video conference. Look at question 14. Please itemize all non-monetary gifts received from Mr. Hayes, including details regarding their location and your justification for accepting such sentimental items from a relative stranger in a period of alleged vulnerability. Eleanor traced the cold typeface with a fingertip. Caleb's gifts, the leather-bound journal she used for gardening notes, the small, framed sketch of Willow Bend Cottage he had drawn, the Aegean pendant. Simple gestures rooted in genuine affection. Ryan saw them as evidence of a slow, insidious grooming process. They want to imply I am so desperate for affection that I confuse trinkets with true worth, Eleanor said, the bitterness sharp in her throat. Precisely. And look at question 21, specifically targeting the emotional landscape, Holloway continued, scrolling down the document. Describe in detail any conversation where the deceased, Arthur Vance, expressed concern regarding your future emotional stability or ability to manage the Vance trust alone. Eleanor laughed, a dry, humorless sound that surprised even herself. Arthur's primary concern was always whether the hedge funds were performing well, Ms. Holloway. He certainly never foresaw his own children using his legacy as a cudgel to force me into perpetual widowhood. The pressure was relentless. Every financial detail was scrutinized, not for mismanagement, but for deviation from the rigid, self-imposed decorum of a grieving matriarch. They leveraged the fact that Eleanor had recently sold a few minor, inherited stocks to fund a small, independent charity initiative, a project Arthur had dismissed as impractical. Ryan used this as proof of unwise, non-trust-aligned charitable endeavors driven by emotional impulse. The children's contempt wasn't limited to paper. They mobilized their social apparatus. Dinners and luncheons that Eleanor once attended as a fixture of high society dried up. Friends, long accustomed to Eleanor's role as the dignified, perpetually supportive widow, now offered hesitant, pitying glances, whispering about her lapse in judgment and the poor, dear children who are just trying to protect their mother. Jessica, meanwhile, escalated her personal manipulation. Unable to beat Eleanor legally, she attacked the emotional nexus, the grandchildren. Eleanor received a curt text message from Jessica one afternoon, devoid of pleasantries. "Grandma, the children miss you terribly. They asked why you don't come to Sycamore Creek anymore. I told them you were very busy with your new friend. They don't understand why you prioritize a stranger over them. Call me when you realize the true meaning of family." The text hit Eleanor with agonizing precision. She loved her grandchildren fiercely. To imply she was sacrificing their innocent affection for her own late-stage romance was cruel. She called Jessica back immediately, her voice steady but strained. "Jessica, do not use the children as pawns in this dispute. I have attempted to arrange visits at the park, at the museum, neutral territory. You have blocked every single one. Why should I facilitate a relationship that undermines their stability?" Jessica challenged, her voice rising in feigned outrage. "They need the structure of the family, Mom. They need to know that Arthur's memory is sacred. How can I teach them respect for their grandfather when you're out cavorting with some gold-digging landscaper?" "Stop, Jessica. Caleb is not a gold digger. He is a respected professional, and he is a good man. And your father's memory does not require me to sacrifice my remaining years in solitude. It requires loyalty. It requires respect." Jessica shrieked. "You are making a mockery of the last 30 years. You're acting like some kind of desperate teenager trying to relive her 20s. Ryan and I are truly worried about you, Mom. We think you need help. Real help. You are mentally unstable right now, and if the court doesn't see that, the rest of society will." That word, unstable, reverberated in Eleanor's mind. It was the weapon Ryan wielded in the courtroom, and Jessica wielded in the parlor. They weren't questioning her love for Caleb, they were questioning her sanity for daring to feel anything outside their control. "I am not unstable, Jessica," Eleanor replied, the years of internalized conflict shedding away, leaving behind a hard core of defiance. "I am alive. And that frightens you both more than anything else. You are entitled to your feelings of resentment, but you are not entitled to define my life. Until you can speak to me with civility and acknowledge that I am capable of making my own choices, there will be no contact." Eleanor hung up the phone. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the explosive release of 6 years of suppressed identity. Caleb watched Eleanor manage these attacks with a mix of admiration and pain. He insisted on fighting the financial accusations head-on. He contacted Miss Holloway and volunteered every single piece of documentation regarding his business, Willow Bend Landscaping and Design. He disclosed his moderate retirement savings, his assets, and his lack of significant debt. He wanted no ambiguity about his self-sufficiency. "I want Ryan's lawyer to choke on the idea that I am doing this for money," Caleb told Eleanor one evening, reviewing his own tax returns with a meticulous frustration. "I am doing this because I love you, and I won't let them turn our relationship into a financial spreadsheet." Caleb's forthrightness was a critical counterpoint to the insinuations. It demonstrated he had nothing to hide, shifting the focus back onto the children's motives, pure, unadulterated control. The court date for the initial hearing, where the judge would determine the sufficiency of Ryan's co-trustee petition, was set for early February. The looming stress of the legal proceedings had taken a physical toll on Eleanor, yet it had also stripped away the last veneer of compromise. On the Monday before the hearing, Eleanor agreed to meet Miss Holloway for a strategy lunch at the Metropolitan Grill, an establishment ironically popular among Ryan's high-powered associates. Eleanor chose the location deliberately, she was tired of hiding. She arrived early, wearing a simple, tailored navy suit, a statement of professionalism and composure. She sat near the front, choosing a table bathed in winter light, the Aegean pendant resting visibly against the dark fabric. Holloway arrived, and they were halfway through discussing the finer points of trust law when a sudden, familiar disturbance erupted near the entrance. Ryan and Jessica, accompanied by Ryan's aggressive, slick-haired lawyer, Mr. Stern, entered the restaurant. They were clearly there for a business lunch of their own, but the moment Ryan spotted his mother, strategically placed and enjoying a conversation, his face contorted in a mixture of fury and disbelief. This was it, the public confrontation, the event that would irrevocably define the family's fracture. Ryan marched toward Eleanor's table, ignoring the startled glances of the other patrons. Jessica trailed behind him, looking horrified but making no move to stop him. "Mother. What in the hell do you think you're doing?" Ryan demanded, looming over the table. Eleanor slowly set down her fork and looked up, meeting his enraged gaze without flinching. She hadn't seen him face to face since Thanksgiving. His corporate facade was fractured, revealing raw entitlement. "I am having lunch, Ryan. I suggest you go have yours. Don't play games. You know exactly who frequents this establishment. You are making a calculated display of this instability just days before the hearing. Are you deliberately trying to embarrass us?" "Embarrass you?" Eleanor repeated softly, resting her hands on the pristine white tablecloth. "Ryan, I am merely existing. The embarrassment lies entirely with you and Jessica, for having the audacity to file a petition that questions my competence solely because I found happiness outside of your prescribed timeline." Jessica finally stepped forward, her voice a tense, pleading whisper, the classic manipulative tone she reserved for emotional appeals. "Mom, please. This is exactly what we mean. You're being reckless. You look unwell. We just want you to come home. End this fling, and we can drop all this, we can go back to normal." Ryan, emboldened by the audience of their lawyer and the hushed restaurant, leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh, controlled snarl meant only for Eleanor. "Normal means respecting Dad's memory, Mother. It means knowing your place. You're jeopardizing everything, the trust, the reputation, the legacy built on Arthur's name. Caleb Hayes is destroying that, and you are allowing it because you are acting like a fool." He pointed at the Aegean pendant around her neck, sneering. "Look at that. That cheap piece of junk. That's what he gives you? While Dad gave you this?" Ryan reached into his expensive suit jacket pocket and pulled out Arthur's gold watch, laying the heavy, engraved timepiece dramatically on the table, right next to Eleanor's wine glass. It was a tangible, golden weight of expectation. "This watch is worth more than Hayes' entire cottage, Mother. This is value. This is fidelity. And you choose a trinket over the foundation of our entire lives? You are insane. You are actively trying to dishonor him." The weight of the watch felt enormous, a symbol of the suffocating, silent bargain of her marriage, wealth exchanged for conformity. Eleanor picked up the heavy gold watch. She didn't hold it gently, she weighed it in her palm, recognizing the burden it represented. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Then, with an unnerving calmness, she looked straight at Ryan. "I am not dishonoring Arthur, Ryan. I am honoring myself. Arthur deserved the dignity of being remembered as the brilliant man he was, not as the eternal definition of my future. And your father would have been ashamed to see how you are attempting to weaponize his memory and his assets against the woman he loved." She placed the gold watch back on the table, deliberately pushing it slightly toward Ryan. "You want the legacy? You want the weight? Take it. It is not mine to carry anymore. The truth is, Ryan, I stayed in that house, I managed the trust, and I upheld the memory out of love and duty. I did everything I was supposed to do. For 6 years. And now, I have earned the right to live a life that doesn't require your approval." Her gaze hardened, shifting briefly to Jessica, whose face was pale with shock. "I may be 56, but I am not foolish, nor am I desperate. I am choosing genuine affection over manufactured importance. If that choice makes me insane in your world, then I embrace the insanity. This conversation is over. Please remove yourselves and your lawyer from my sight." The sheer force of Eleanor's self-possession was devastating. This was not the timid, conflict-avoidant mother they relied on. This was a woman who had finally found her voice, sharpened by months of intense legal and emotional pressure. "Mr. Vance, we need to leave. Now." Ryan stumbled backward, his face flushed with impotent rage. Jessica burst into tears, covering her face as Mr. Stern ushered them rapidly out of the Metropolitan Grill, leaving the heavy silence and the gold watch on the table as testament to the brutal, public break. Eleanor watched them go, her breath ragged but her posture unyielding. "Well," Miss Holloway finally said, picking up her napkin. "That should provide the court with ample evidence of whose judgment is truly compromised by emotional excess." Eleanor picked up the gold watch, holding it for a final, significant moment. It was magnificent, but cold. She handed it to Holloway. Please have this delivered to Ryan's office. I want no part of it. She then gently touched the small, smooth Aegean pendant at her throat. I prefer the lightness. The Metropolitan Grill incident, captured by several phones and recounted rapidly throughout their intertwined social circles, did exactly what Eleanor knew it would. It painted Ryan not as the dutiful son, but as a coercive bully. When the preliminary hearing arrived a week later, the atmosphere was fraught. Ryan and Mr. Stern presented their case with aggressive certainty, detailing the supposed erratic behavior and the suspicious relationship with Caleb. Caleb attended the hearing, sitting quietly in the gallery, dressed in his best suit, projecting an aura of dignified calm that undermined every attempt by Ryan's team to paint him as a street hustler. Holloway, however, dismantled their entire argument in less than 30 minutes. She presented Eleanor's impeccable record of trust management, the detailed audit of Caleb's finances proving his independence, and most crucially, the transcripts of the abusive, manipulative communications from Ryan and Jessica. Holloway argued that the petition was not about protection of assets, but harassment, control, and a violation of the primary trustee's autonomy. The judge, a seasoned woman accustomed to the machinations of generational wealth disputes, looked bored by Ryan's histrionics. She delivered her ruling with concise finality. The court finds no substantial evidence of financial imprudence, negligence, or emotional instability on the part of the primary trustee, Eleanor Vance. On the contrary, the record indicates meticulous stewardship of the Vance Trust over the past 6 years. The petition filed by Ryan Vance and Jessica Vance appears to be motivated not by financial concern, but by deep-seated personal resentment over their mother's life choices. She dismissed the petition with prejudice, effectively barring Ryan from refiling the same claim. The entire edifice of Ryan's control strategy collapsed in a single, quiet sentence. Ryan shot up from his seat, his face scarlet. Your Honor, this is unconscionable. She is making decisions that will affect the entire family legacy. Vance, the judge interrupted, her voice sharp. Your mother's decisions regarding her personal life are not under the purview of this court unless those decisions materially endanger the financial stability of the trust. They do not. I suggest you remember that Eleanor Vance is not merely a custodian of an estate, she is an autonomous adult, entitled to her own happiness. Eleanor felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. It was official. She was legally, formally free from the tyranny of their expectation. The final act of the drama unfolded several weeks later, back at Sycamore Creek Estate. Eleanor needed to formally transfer her remaining personal belongings out of the house. Caleb accompanied her, driving the truck, acting as quiet ballast against the cold sterility of the sprawling residence. They found Ryan and Jessica waiting for them in the foyer. They weren't there to apologize, they were there to try and salvage the last shred of their control. The loss of the legal battle had wounded them deeply, leaving them exposed and brittle. We heard the ruling, Ryan said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual aggressive cadence. We still believe you made a terrible mistake, Mother, and that Caleb is a fundamental threat to our family structure. We love you, Mom, Jessica added, tears welling instantly. But we can't accept this. We can't have him around. You have to choose. Eleanor closed the box of personal letters she was holding. She looked at her children, truly seeing them, not as manipulators, but as two adults trapped by the memory of a perfect father and terrified of an imperfect mother. I made my choice 6 months ago when I decided I deserved to be happy, Eleanor stated, her voice calm and absolute. I chose Caleb because he reminds me that the world is still vibrant, and that I am still capable of love, not just duty. He honors me for who I am, not for whose widow I am. Ryan stepped forward, desperation mixing with disdain. But what about us? What about Dad? Will you truly sacrifice your own children and Arthur's wishes for this midlife adventure? Your father wished for my happiness, Eleanor corrected gently. He didn't mandate my solitude. And as for you too, you have defined my value by my suffering. You only felt secure when I was the grieving martyr. Now that I am living, you call it a betrayal. She took a decisive step away from the foyer's center, toward the front door. I am not sacrificing you. You are sacrificing me, by demanding I live a life that is no longer true. I will not be the perpetual widow for your comfort. I refuse to be silenced. Then you've lost us, Ryan stated, his jaw set in a rigid line. You understand that, don't you? You choose him, you lose your family. The real one. Eleanor paused at the threshold, turning back one last time. Her eyes were sad, but clear. She felt the profound, aching grief of the fracture, but she also recognized the necessary amputation. I chose myself, Ryan. And if your definition of family requires my self-negation, then that is a choice you are making, not me. She walked out the door of Sycamore Creek Estate and stepped onto the driveway, where Caleb was waiting by the truck, holding open the passenger door. He didn't ask her if she was okay, he just offered a steady presence. Eleanor got into the passenger seat. As Caleb pulled the truck away, turning his back on the oppressive weight of the estate, Eleanor looked back at the house, her former shrine. Ryan and Jessica stood in the doorway, two statues of inherited indignation, watching her leave. Eleanor didn't wave. She didn't cry. She simply turned forward, fastening her seatbelt. It is done, Caleb, she said, letting out a long, quiet breath. It is, he agreed, reaching across the bench seat to take her hand, gently touching the small, simple Aegean pendant resting at her throat. They drove towards Willow Bend Cottage, toward the quiet lake, toward the simplicity and the hard-won future. The journey was not without pain, the scar of the familial break would always remain. But Eleanor had finally escaped the tyranny of memory. She had traded the gilded cage and the heavy expectations for the open road, proving that at 56, the choice to live authentically was the most profound act of self-love and courage she could ever undertake. She was free, and in the arms of a man who saw her, she finally began to truly inhabit her own life. Smash that like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.